From Their Eyes, a Shadow of the Colossus based fic. Chapter 16, On the Old Palace Grounds. Argus sat on a ledge next to the old palace. It had been the place the little people had set up for their leader during their time here. It had been a beautiful place when they were here. They had taken care of it, happy they could live in the Forbidden Lands. Argus shook his head, remembering that whole time, and sighed. That had been another lifetime, when the little people didn't fully understand the true evil of Dorman. Dorman was the most untrustworthy of all of their kind. His mind drifted back to the old lands, when the division of their kind had started. He had been one of those who had been duped by Dorman, and that was because of the shadows. At the time, Dorman had claimed that he wanted to destroy them, but needed help. They were all supposed to attack the castle. That was their prison. The joint attack, as he was told, would have destroyed them all. He learned in time that it was a lie, and that Dorman was working with the shadow beings as well. Remembering all that made him sigh and look down. The cliff he sat on was over a huge chasm in the Forbidden Realms. When they had first come to the realm, he had ventured all over. He had been despondent, having been exiled because he was foolish enough to follow Dorman. He found the chasm in a moment of depression, and in his weakness, he jumped into the chasm. It was then he had discovered its secret. Later, when the little people had found it, he had cautioned them about it. He showed them that it was mystical. He threw a boulder into the chasm, and after a short time, it appeared out of nowhere on the cliff. At that point, the little people placed the palace their people would have there, keeping them all safe from it. While what happened hadn't killed him long ago, it would have definitely killed one of the little people. Even Lord Iman respected it. After the little people defeated Dorman, when he tried to take up his old habits in the Forbidden Lands, he moved to the palace area, just in case the little people had wished to remain in them. That hadn't been the case, but Lord Iman had thanked him for wanting to do so. The little people left, but Argus was certain that if more came, some might foolishly fall into the chasm he had found. He remained at the ledge, looking up at the sky, knowing that past some mystical boundary, the old lands were there. He wondered how the rest of his kind were doing. He was certain that Dorman's actions had more ramifications than had been anticipated. He would never know, but he felt certain that his kind might have departed. The little people back in the old lands would have feared them now, since they also feared the shadow beings. Almost as if ordained by fate, Argus heard the voice of Malice in his head. Even though he wasn't hearing it in person, the unmistakable tone of concern echoed in Malice's thoughts. Argus, one of the little people have returned to the Forbidden Lands, and he carries the sword. He's been eliminating the Colossi. Only you and I are left. We need to stop him, for I think reason is no longer an option. Argus realized right away what that meant. When they defeated Dorman long ago, the ceremony they used to split his power long ago divided Dorman's power in such a way that should they be defeated, the fiend who did so would not have enough to overpower the next one faced. The only way this would fail is if Dorman put half of what he had left in the person fighting them. Argus thought with certainty that Dorman would never do that. The mad colossi had wanted complete control of everything, and would even help the dreaded shadow beings and their queen to get it. He sighed again and wondered who of the little people would be so foolish. Surely it wouldn't be Lord Emon. That little person had been blessed with magical abilities that would extend his life beyond the norm for his kind by at least tenfold. Of course, once the little people left the Forbidden Lands, it was hard to tell how fast time progressed, where they went to. He was still unsure how time passed in these magical lands, since the only time he saw the sun rise and set had been while the little people were there. He was brought out of his thoughts when he heard something in the palace grounds. He waited for a few moments to make sure he wasn't hearing one of the animals. Once he was satisfied that it wasn't an animal, Argus got up and climbed off the ledge he had been resting on. He emerged in the training area the forces of Lord Emon had used, and he saw a little person there. His keen eyes could see that the little person wasn't what he used to be. The little man's soul was not sparkling in his eyes. Argus knew that killing the man would be a mercy. As if reading his mind, the little man turned and ran. Argus took his time, since there was no way any little person could outrun a colossi. The little man was even running to the walls, no doubt to avoid his stone blade. Argus approached the spot, raised it up, and slammed it where the little man had been. To his surprise, the little man jumped out of the way, and then climbed upon the damaged area. The little man was using that damage to climb up the viewing galleries. He realized what the little man was trying to do. The little man must have an idea of where the sigils were, or at least one of them. Argus stalked along the side where the little man had climbed into the viewing galleries. On occasion he would see the little man and took note of his grayish skin. At one point he could have sworn he saw the start of horns. That actually made him pause. Before they had been banished, Malice had told him that just as the battle around the castle had ended, Dorman had done something. It was as if the colossi had shed some of his power. It was said that a little person had been born with horns. It had been a bad omen, and he has been sure something was in the works. Argus' thoughts returned to the present when he felt something land on him. He glanced over his shoulder and realized he was at the crossover. The little person had jumped on him from it. He even felt the figure climbing his body. He knew where the little man was heading, and Argus started to shake his body. The second he felt a pain in his skull, he knew he didn't shake them loose. A second later, he felt it again, but he didn't care. He knew the other sigil was concealed in the palm of the hand he held his weapon in. He had no intention of dropping his weapon and started to lower his head in an attempt to swing it back upwards. Hopefully, the action would send the little man to the ground, and he could flatten them with his stone blade. He paused after throwing back his head and looked around. The little man could not be seen. Could the little man still be clinging to him? No little person could hold on to a colossi that long, could they? He got an answer when he felt a stabbing sensation in his arm. It was the side that he held his weapon in. As the pain started to fade, he found he could no longer feel the weapon in his hand. He looked down and saw that his hand had opened, with his weapon now on the ground next to it. In his mind, he started to panic. He was now weaponless, and the last sigil binding Dorman's powers to him was exposed. Argus heard a sound behind him, and turned to see the little man had jumped off of his arm. The little man seemed to aim a weapon at him, one he knew the little people called a bow. That weapon would not hurt him. Annoy him, yes, but definitely not hurt him. The little man had to know this, since he already caused Argus great harm with what had to be the sacred sword. He wasn't going to give the little man a chance. He raised his empty hand in the air, made a fist, and brought it down. He didn't see if it hit the little man, but he felt it did. Nothing could have survived that strike. He raised his hand up, expecting to see a flattened individual there, but saw nothing. That couldn't be the case. The little man had to be dead. If he hadn't done it, then the little man had to be lying somewhere, mortally wounded. Argus turned to look for the little man. He was in mid-turn when it happened. He felt a stabbing pain in the palm of his hand, and then nothing. That feeling quickly spread as Argus felt his life force stopping. The little man had reached and stabbed the second sigil. It was over. He had failed. He couldn't even topple into the abyss. His dying thoughts were those of hope that malice could stop the little man. Dorman was happier than he had ever been. His plan had exceeded all expectations. Now only one thing stood in his way: malice. The traitorous Colossi was the cause of both his defeats. Once his helper was able to, his biggest foe would be destroyed, and he would be free to exact revenge, both on Iman's people and on the old realm. He would reshape it into the world he would control, with the help of the Shadow Queen. He turned his thoughts back to the little man. The shadows had just brought the little man back. With his strength returning, he took a moment to check the mind of the little man. He sensed that the only thoughts there were for the girl and the mission. That was perfect. The little man would complete the task, remembering his reason for doing it. If all played out right, as he expected, it would be Lord Iman who would do it. It would be the ultimate blow. Dorman knew he would need to make this little person a bit stronger. Yes, it would make the horns grow a bit more, but it was needed. While Malice was stationary, he was powerful and tall. His proxy will have to be able to make the climb, and if need be, survive the fall. He also gave his proxy a boost to his endurance. Malice would no doubt use fireballs to stop his proxy. For a moment, Dorman thought about the little man's horse. With Dorman's power being infused in the little man, and the signs of it now visible in horns, the horse would no doubt flee. Dorman had to do something, so he infused some magic to control the horse to the little man. No doubt Malice would try to disrupt it, but it would be too late. He then laughed for his impending victory, until the little man was about to wake. Outside of the Forbidden Lands, in the world where Lord Emon's people had gone back to, Lord Emon and some of his men were making their way to the gateway to the Forbidden Lands. Lord Emon was in the lead, knowing that if they didn't make it in time, Dorman would return to power. That would be bad for his people, even though they no longer resided in that strange realm where time moved very differently. Dorman returned to power might mean he'd be able to leave that realm, and from what he had learned a long time ago, that would be bad for many, especially if the figure known as the Shadow Queen was able to join Dorman.